For 30 years, a mother waited by the phone. For 30 years, a predator walked free, living in plain sight, blending into the fabric of small-town Michigan like he belonged there. And for 30 years, a single question haunted Clare County. How does a 16-year-old girl disappear in broad daylight, 6 blocks from home, and leave no trace behind? The answer was buried in a receipt, a smudged fingerprint, and one man's arrogance. But before we get to the arrest that shocked an entire community in 2024, we need to go back. Back to October 18th, 1994. Back to the last time anyone saw Julia Whelan alive. Because what happened that autumn afternoon wasn't random. It wasn't a tragic accident or a moment of bad luck. It was calculated, planned. And it started months before Julia ever walked down Maple Street for the last time. Before we dive in, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know who's here with me on this one. And if you're new to the channel, welcome to Easy Case, where we dig deep into the cases others forget. Hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you're not going to want to miss how this ends. Now, let's go back to 1994. Clare County, Michigan, in the fall of 1994, was the kind of place people moved to for the quiet. Nestled along the shores of Lake Shamrock in the northern part of the state, it was a town of about 8,000 people. The kind of town where Friday night football games packed the bleachers, where the diner knew your order before you sat down, and where parents still let their kids ride bikes until the streetlights came on. It wasn't perfect, no place is, but it felt safe. Julia Whelan was 16 that October. She lived with her mother, Rachel, and her stepfather, Derek, in a 2-story rental on Maple Street just a few blocks from the boardwalk that stretched along the lake. The house had creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was home. Rachel worked double shifts at the Clare County Boardwalk Diner, the kind of place that served coffee in thick ceramic mugs and pie that locals swore by. Derek worked at the auto plant on the edge of town, pulling long hours on the line. Julia was quiet, not shy, exactly just reserved. She had a small circle of friends, got decent grades, and spent most of her free time reading or listening to music in her room. She wasn't the type to get into trouble. She followed the rules. She checked in. She came home on time. Her mother would later say that Julia was the kind of kid who made parenting easy. Too easy, maybe. Because when you trust your child that much, you stop looking for the cracks. And by the fall of 1994, there were cracks. Julia had been spending more time on the computer. Their bulky gateway desktop sat in the corner of the living room, and Julia would sit there for hours, the glow of the monitor lighting up her face in the dim room. Rachel didn't think much of it. Kids were getting into the internet. It was the new thing. Chat rooms, message boards, email. It seemed harmless. But Julia had been quieter than usual, more secretive. She'd close browser windows when her mum walked by. She'd take the cordless phone into her room and talk in hushed tones. When Rachel asked who she was talking to, Julia would shrug and say, "Just Brittany," or "Nobody important." Rachel didn't push. She trusted her daughter. That trust would haunt her for the rest of her life. October 18th, 1994, was a Saturday. The early autumn sun hung low over Clare County that afternoon, casting long copper shadows across the wooden fishing pier on Lake Shamrock. The air carried that familiar northern chill around 58 degrees, with the faint smell of wet leaves drifting in from the woods. The kind of day where you needed a jacket in the morning, but could get away with a flannel by noon. Julia stood at her bedroom window, watching fishing boats trace slow paths across the lake. She wore denim shorts and an oversized flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her light brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, a few strands falling loose around her face. Her green hazel eyes scanned the neighborhood below like she was waiting for something. Downstairs, Rachel folded laundry in the living room. The small TV murmured news about U.S. troops overseas. She was exhausted. Another double shift behind her, another one ahead tomorrow. She barely glanced up from the towel she was folding when Julia came down the stairs. "I'm meeting Brittany at the boardwalk around 5, Julia said, slipping her arms into a denim jacket. "We're just going to walk around, maybe get hot cocoa." Rachel nodded absently. "Be back by 9. "I will." Julia leaned down and kissed her mother on the cheek. Rachel would remember the warmth of that kiss for the rest of her life. She would remember the faint smell of vanilla body spray. She would remember the sound of Julia's sneakers on the hardwood floor. And she would remember the metallic slam of the screen door as Julia walked out. That sound, sharp, final, would echo in Rachel's mind for 30 years. Julia walked down Maple Street toward the boardwalk, her sneakers tapping softly on the pavement. The neighborhood was quiet. A few cars passed. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Mrs. Henderson was watering her chrysanthemums in the front yard. She waved. Julia waved back. Mr. Chen was rinsing off his pickup truck in his driveway. He nodded hello. Julia smiled politely and kept walking. Nothing about those last moments suggested anything was wrong. Nothing about the way she moved, the way she looked, the way she carried herself, hinted at what was about to happen. At 4:52 p.m., security footage from the Shell station at the corner of Maple and Lake Shore Drive caught Julia on camera. She's standing near the payphone outside, checking her teal-green Nokia. She glances at the screen, types something quickly, then crosses the road toward the boardwalk. At 5:04 p.m., another camera, this one mounted above the red-painted wooden arch that read, "Welcome to Clare County." Boardwalk recorded her standing beneath it. She's shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She glances around. She checks her phone again. She brushes a strand of hair behind her ear. She's waiting for someone. At 5:11 p.m., she receives a text message. Her expression changes. Not fear, not yet. More like recognition mixed with hesitation. She reads it. She types back quickly, her thumbs moving fast over the tiny keys, and then she turns away from the boardwalk entrance. Instead of walking toward the Ferris wheel, the concession stands. The place she told her mother she was going, she turns left, toward the Marina Access Road. That left turn was the last time anyone saw Julia Whelan in person. By 6:30 p.m., Rachel felt uneasy. Julia always checked in. Always. Even if it was just a quick call from a payphone to say she was fine, she was having fun, she'd be home soon. But Rachel's phone hadn't rung. She tried calling Julia's cell. It went straight to voicemail. She told herself not to panic. Maybe the battery died. Maybe Julia forgot to charge it. Teenagers did that. But the unease didn't go away. It sat in her chest like a stone. At 7:15 p.m., Rachel called Brittany's house. Brittany's mother answered, her voice warm and confused. "Oh, hi, Rachel. No, Brittany's been home all day. We've been baking cookies." She didn't have plans with Julia today. Rachel's stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Brittany's been here since this morning." Rachel hung up. Her hands were shaking. She called Derek at the plant. He told her to stay calm, that they'd figure it out when he got home. But Rachel couldn't stay calm. She grabbed her keys and drove to the boardwalk. She walked up and down the wooden planks, scanning every face, every group of teenagers. She checked the Ferris wheel, the arcade, the concession stand. Nobody had seen Julia. She drove to the Dairy Queen, the movie theater, the park, everywhere Julia liked to go. Nothing. By 8 p.m., Derek was home. They drove together, checking every street, every parking lot, every corner of Clare County. Rachel called every number she could find in the kitchen junk drawer, friends from school, neighbors, anyone who might know where Julia was. Nobody knew. At 9:45 p.m., Rachel called the sheriff's department. The dispatcher took the information calmly. Female, 16 years old, denim shorts, flannel shirt, light brown hair in a ponytail. Last seen around 5 o'clock near the boardwalk. Because Julia was 16, department policy usually meant waiting before opening a formal missing person case unless there was evidence of immediate danger. But Rachel insisted. Something was wrong. Julia wouldn't just disappear. She wouldn't do this. Deputy Daniels arrived at the house at 10:30 p.m. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a notebook and a flashlight. He asked the standard questions. Did Julia have a boyfriend? No. Any recent arguments? No. Trouble at school? No. Drugs? Alcohol? No. 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 Julia was responsible. She was quiet. She followed the rules. Daniels took a school photo. Julia smiling softly in a blue sweater, and left. He said they'd start looking first thing in the morning. Rachel sat on Julia's bed in the dark. The room still smelled like vanilla body spray. Julia's stuffed bear, a worn, faded thing she'd had since she was 5, sat on the pillow. Rachel picked it up and held it against her chest. She would later say that sitting there, in the silence of her daughter's room, she knew. She knew Julia wasn't coming home. Sunday morning brought a cruelly bright sky. Rachel hadn't slept. Derek had driven for hours before dawn, searching every back road, every rest stop, every place he could think of. Nothing. At Ota, Tretio, Detective Marcus Webb arrived. He was in his early 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He asked to see Julia's room. He looked at the posters on the walls, the books on the shelf, the clothes folded neatly in the dresser. He opened the closet. He checked under the bed. Then he asked to see Julia's computer. Rachel led him to the gateway desktop in the living room. Webb asked for Julia's password. Rachel didn't know it. Webb unplugged the tower and carried it to his car. He said their tech person would access it at the station. He also requested Julia's cell phone records. By Sunday afternoon, Sprint had sent over the logs. 3 text messages between 4:30 and 5:15 p.m. on Saturday, all from the same number. A number Rachel didn't recognize. Webb ran it. The number belonged to a prepaid track phone purchased with cash at a Walmart in Bay City 3 weeks earlier. No name, no address, no way to trace it. That detail changed everything. This wasn't a runaway. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had been planning this. Detective Webb interviewed Brittany on Sunday evening. She was nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her sweatshirt. At first, she said she didn't know anything. But Webb pressed gently, and eventually, Brittany admitted something. Julia had been talking to someone online. She didn't tell me much, Brittany said quietly. But she said he was older, not like old, but maybe in his 20s. She said he understood her, that he was different. Webb asked if Julia ever mentioned his name. Brittany shook her head. She just called him T.J. At 2 a.m. Monday morning, the tech specialist at the Clare County Sheriff's Office broke into Julia's computer. Inside her Teen Connect account, a social networking site popular with teenagers in the mid-90s, they found months of messages between Julia and someone calling himself T.J. Houston, 29. He claimed to be 24 years old, said he worked construction in Houston, Texas, said he'd grown up in Michigan and missed it, said he understood what it was like to feel invisible. The photos he sent Julia were stolen from a California man's modeling portfolio. The man had no idea his face was being used to lure a teenage girl. The messages started innocent. Compliments, questions about her day, validation. You're so mature for your age. You're not like other girls. I can talk to you about things I can't talk to anyone else about. Slowly, over weeks, the tone shifted. He told her she deserved better, that her parents didn't understand her, that he could give her the life she wanted. He sent her the prepaid phone number, told her to text him there so they could talk privately. And on October 18th, 1994, at 5:09 p.m., he sent her the final message, "Change of plans. My truck broke down at the marina parking lot. Meet me there. Blue Ford pickup." Julia replied 2 minutes later, "Okay, I'm coming." Detective Webb obtained security footage from a bait shop across from the marina. The quality was grainy, the angle awkward, but it captured enough. At 5:13 p.m., a blue Ford F-150 pulls into the gravel parking lot. 2 minutes later, Julia appears on the sidewalk, walking quickly. The driver steps out of the truck. He's wearing a baseball cap pulled low, face hidden in shadow. They speak briefly, maybe 10 seconds. Julia nods. She walks to the passenger side. She gets in. At 5:17 p.m., the truck pulls away and merges onto the main road toward the highway. The license plate is unreadable. The blue truck and Julia vanish. When Rachel saw the footage, she collapsed. Derek caught her before she hit the floor. She was sobbing, gasping for air, her whole body shaking. She thought she knew him, Rachel whispered. She thought she was safe. News spread fast. Flyers went up across Michigan. Julia's face appeared on telephone poles, in gas stations, on the evening news. Tips flooded in. Someone claimed they saw a girl matching Julia's description at a gas station near Mount Pleasant. Another said she was seen at a rest stop, heading south toward Indiana. Every lead went nowhere. Rachel quit her job at the boardwalk. She couldn't stand being there, couldn't stand seeing the place where she once thought her daughter would be safe. Derek took unpaid leave from the plant. He spent weeks driving through towns, truck stops, shelters, showing strangers Julia's picture. Days turned to weeks. Weeks slid into winter. Christmas came without a tree. Julia's bedroom stayed untouched, frozen in time. The stuffed bear still sat on her pillow. The calendar on her wall still showed October. What none of them could understand was how a girl could disappear in broad daylight, less than a mile from home, and how someone could plan it so carefully that not a single trace was left behind. Julia Whelan simply vanished. And Clare County was left with a question that would haunt it for years. How does a 16-year-old girl disappear without a trace 6 blocks from home? What do you think happened to Julia? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because in the next part, we're diving into 30 years of silence, a mother who refused to give up, and the one mistake a predator made that brought everything crashing down. The hardest part of grief isn't the crying. It isn't the sleepless nights or the empty chair at the dinner table. It's the waiting. Waiting for a phone call that never comes. Waiting for a knock on the door. Waiting for someone, anyone, to tell you what happened. And when the answers don't come, when the days turn into months and the months turn into years, you're left suspended in a kind of limbo that has no name. You can't move forward because there's no closure. You can't let go because there's no body. You're just stuck. For Rachel Whelan, that limbo lasted 30 years. But here's the thing about cold cases. They're never really cold. They're just waiting. Waiting for the right person to ask the right question. Waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for a predator to make one small mistake. And in 2019, someone finally asked the right question. But before we get there, we need to talk about what those 30 years looked like. Because this isn't just a story about a girl who disappeared. It's a story about what happens to the people left behind when the world moves on and they can't. In the weeks after Julia vanished, Clare County became a different place. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to the boardwalk alone. Curfews got earlier. Doors that used to stay unlocked at night were bolted shut. The town that once felt safe now felt fragile, like one strong wind could shatter it completely. Rachel and Derek's house on Maple Street became a command center. Volunteers came and went, organizing search parties, printing flyers, manning phone lines. The dining room table was covered in maps, highlighters, and lists of places Julia might be. The living room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Detective Marcus Webb worked the case like his life depended on it. He interviewed everyone Julia knew, friends, teachers, neighbors, classmates. He tracked down every user on Teen Connect who had interacted with the TJ Houston 29 account. He contacted police departments in surrounding counties, sent bulletins to truck stops and motels across the Midwest. The track phone number led nowhere. It had been used exactly 4 times all to text Julia, and then never again. The phone itself was never recovered. The Teen Connect account went dark the moment Julia got into that truck. Whoever was behind it knew exactly what he was doing. He'd covered his tracks, he'd planned every step, and then he disappeared. By December 1994, the tips had slowed to a trickle. Rachel refused to take down the flyers. She drove to neighboring towns every weekend, stapling Julia's face to every telephone pole she could find. Her hands were raw from the cold, blistered from the staple gun. Derek begged her to rest. She couldn't. Christmas came. Rachel didn't put up a tree. She didn't buy presents. She sat in Julia's room on Christmas morning, holding that worn stuffed bear, staring at the calendar still frozen on October. Derek tried to hold it together. He went back to work in January, but his mind was never really there. He'd zone out on the line, miss his breaks, forget to eat. His co-workers didn't know what to say to him, so they said nothing. The silence was worse than pity. By the spring of 1995, the case had gone cold. Detective Webb still worked it when he could, but new cases kept coming in. The department was small. Resources were limited. The FBI had moved on to other investigations. The media stopped calling. Julia's face, once plastered across every news station in Michigan, faded from the headlines. But Rachel never stopped looking. Here's what people don't tell you about living with an unsolved disappearance. It destroys everything. Rachel and Derek's marriage didn't survive. How could it? They were 2 people drowning in the same ocean, and neither of them had the strength to save the other. They divorced in 1997. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter, it was just over. Derek moved to Grand Rapids, got a job at a different plant, tried to start over. He remarried in 2001. He had 2 more kids. He built a new life. But he never stopped thinking about Julia. He kept her photo in his wallet until the day he died in 2016. Rachel stayed in Clare County. She couldn't leave. Leaving felt like abandoning Julia. So she stayed in that house on Maple Street, in that town that had become a graveyard of memories. She got a job at a non-profit that helped families of missing children. She answered phones, organized support groups, sat with mothers who were living the same nightmare she was. She became the person she wished she'd had in those first terrible weeks. And every year, on October 18th, she held a vigil at the boardwalk. The first few years, dozens of people showed up. Candles, flowers, tears. But as time went on, the crowds got smaller. 5 years, 10 years, 15. People moved on. Life moved on. But Rachel didn't. She kept Julia's room exactly as it was. The posters on the walls, the books on the shelf, the stuffed bear on the pillow. She dusted it every week. She changed the sheets every month, even though no one slept there. "I just want to bring her home," Rachel said in a 2005 interview with a local news station. She was 50 years old by then, her hair streaked with grey, her face lined with exhaustion. "I don't care if it's been 10 years or 50, I just want to bring my daughter home." The case didn't disappear entirely. In the early 2000s, Julia's story was featured on a true crime TV show, one of those late-night programs with dramatic reenactments and somber narration. It brought a brief surge of tips, but none of them led anywhere. In 2011, a Reddit thread titled "Unsolved Disappearances That Haunt You" featured Julia's case. Users speculated. Some thought she'd been trafficked. Others thought she'd been killed within hours of getting into that truck. A few suggested she might still be alive, held captive somewhere. Rachel read every comment. She couldn't help herself. Detective Webb retired in 1998, but he never let go of the case. He kept a copy of the file at home. He'd pull it out every few months, go through it again, hoping he'd missed something. He hadn't. In 2003, he called Rachel on the anniversary of Julia's disappearance. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I couldn't bring her home." Rachel's voice was steady. "You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." "It never feels like enough," Rachel said quietly. "But you didn't give up. That matters." Webb died in 2012. His daughter found Julia's file in a box in his garage. She mailed it to Rachel with a note. He never stopped thinking about her. By 2015, Julia Whelan's case was 21 years old. Most people in Clare County had forgotten about it. The younger generation didn't even know who she was. The boardwalk had been renovated. The diner where Rachel used to work had closed. The house on Maple Street had new owners. Rachel had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She was 60 years old, living on a modest income, still volunteering with missing children's organizations. She'd given hundreds of interviews over the years, appeared on podcasts, spoken at conferences. She never gave up hope. But hope, after 2 decades, starts to feel like a weight you carry instead of a light you follow. And then, in 2019, something changed. The Clare County Sheriff's Office got a new sheriff that year, a woman named Linda Kovacs, 53, with a background in forensic investigation and a reputation for not letting things go. One of the first things she did was pull every unsolved case from the last 30 years and assign them to a task force. She wanted fresh eyes on old evidence. She wanted to see what new technology could do. Detective Lena Ortiz, 34, was assigned to Julia Whelan's case. Ortiz was sharp, methodical, and stubborn. She'd grown up in Detroit, worked her way through the ranks, and transferred to Clare County because she wanted to make a difference in a smaller department. She didn't have kids of her own, but she had a younger sister, and every time she looked at Julia's photo, she saw her. Ortiz started from scratch. She read every report, watched every piece of footage, interviewed everyone who was still alive and willing to talk. She built a timeline. She mapped out every location. She studied the T.J. Houston, 29, messages like they were a foreign language she needed to decode. And then she found something everyone else had missed. In the original case file, there was a note about a receipt. It had been found near the marina on October 20th, 1994, 2 days after Julia disappeared. A jogger had picked it up and turned it in to the sheriff's department, thinking it might be related. The receipt was from a Speedway gas station in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, about 30 miles north of Clare County. Date: the 18th of October, 1994. Time: 6:47 p.m. Items: diesel fuel, beef jerky, Mountain Dew. Payment: cash. At the time, investigators had dismissed it. Lots of people stopped at that gas station. There was no way to know if it was connected. The receipt had a partial fingerprint on it, but in 1994, fingerprint technology was limited. The print was smudged, incomplete. It wasn't enough to run through the system, so the receipt had been filed away and forgotten. But Ortiz didn't forget. She pulled the receipt from evidence and sent it to the Michigan State Police Forensic Lab with a simple question: can you do anything with this now? Forensic technology in 2020 was light years ahead of 1994. Advanced imaging software could enhance prints that were previously unusable. Chemical treatments could reveal details invisible to the naked eye. And databases, AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, had grown exponentially. In February 2023, the lab called Ortiz. We got a match. Ortiz's heart stopped. Say that again. We lifted a usable print from the receipt, ran it through AFIS. We got a hit. The name was Glenn Raymond Tisch. Age: 54. Current residence: Saginaw, Michigan. Criminal record: arrested in 2002 for soliciting a minor online. Pled down to a lesser charge. Served 18 months. Ortiz pulled his file. In 1994, Glenn Tisch was 24 years old. He lived in Bay City, Michigan, 40 miles from Clare County. He worked as a freelance contractor, no steady employer, no fixed schedule, and according to his 1,994 DMV records, he owned a blue Ford F-150. Ortiz sat in her office, staring at Tisch's photo. He looked ordinary: thinning brown hair, pale eyes, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. But she knew. She knew. She pulled his old ISP records, archived, dusty, nearly impossible to find, but she found them. In 1994, Glenn Tisch had a Teen Connect account. Ortiz didn't sleep that night. She built the case brick by brick. She contacted the FBI. She subpoenaed Tisch's digital records going back decades. She found evidence that he'd continued his predatory behavior well into the 2010 seconds. Different screen names, different platforms, same pattern. She interviewed his ex-wife, who'd divorced him in 2008. The woman described him as controlling, secretive, paranoid. He had a storage unit I was never allowed to go into, she said. He said it was just old tools and junk, but he checked on it constantly. Ortiz got a warrant. She contacted Rachel. Mrs. Whelan, Ortiz said carefully. We have someone. I need you to prepare yourself. Rachel's voice cracked. Are you sure? I'm sure. For the first time in 30 years, Rachel Whelan allowed herself to believe that the waiting might finally be over. But here's the question that kept Ortiz up at night. The question that haunted every investigator who touched this case. If Glenn Tisch had been this careful, this methodical, this invisible for 30 years, what else had he done? And more importantly, was Julia the first? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think they found in that storage unit? And hey, what time is it where you are right now? I'm curious. Let me know. April 12th, 2024, 6:30 a.m. A quiet residential street in Saginaw, Michigan. Modest homes, trimmed lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people wave to each other and complain about potholes at city council meetings. And on this particular morning, that quiet street was about to become the center of a story 30 years in the making. Because here's the equation that had haunted investigators since 1994. One blue truck plus one smudged fingerprint plus 30 years of silence equals. The answer was about to arrive in the form of a tactical team, 4 unmarked vehicles, and a search warrant that would finally close the loop on one of Michigan's most haunting cold cases. But before we get to what they found inside Glenn Raymond Tisch's home, before we get to the storage unit, the evidence, the moment Rachel Whelan had waited 3 decades for, we need to talk about how you catch a ghost. Detective Lena Ortiz had spent 4 months building an airtight case. She didn't want to spook Tish. She didn't want to give him any reason to run, to destroy evidence, to disappear the way Julia had. So she moved carefully, quietly. She coordinated with the FBI. She worked with the prosecutor's office to make sure every warrant, every subpoena, every piece of evidence would hold up in court. She studied Tish's routines, where he worked, where he shopped, where he went on weekends. Glenn Tish lived alone in a small ranch-style house on the east side of Saginaw. He worked part-time at a hardware store. He drove a 10-year-old sedan. He kept to himself. Neighbors described him as polite, but distant. He'd say hello, but he never really talked, one woman said. Just kind of existed. He had no social media presence, no close friends, no family nearby. His ex-wife had moved to Arizona years ago and wanted nothing to do with him. On paper, Glenn Tish was invisible. But Ortiz knew better. She knew that predators like Tish didn't just stop. They evolved. They adapted. They got better at hiding. And she knew that men like him kept trophies. The search warrant was approved on April 10, 2024. 2 days later, at 6:30 a.m., a tactical team surrounded Tish's house. Ortiz was there. So was Sheriff Kovac. So were 2 FBI agents and a forensic team waiting in a van down the street. The plan was simple. Knock, announce, enter. No drama, no standoff. Just a controlled, methodical arrest. At 6:32 a.m., an officer knocked on the door. Silence. Another knock. Louder this time. Glenn Tish, this is the Clare County Sheriff's Office. We have a warrant. Open the door. 30 seconds passed. Then the door opened. Glenn Tish stood there in pajama pants and a faded t-shirt, barefoot, blinking in the early morning light. He looked older than his 54 years. Thin, pale, unremarkable. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice flat. Detective Ortiz stepped forward. "Glenn Raymond Tish, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and suspected murder of Julia Whelan." For a moment, Tish didn't react. He just stared at her, his face blank. And then, so quietly it was almost a whisper, he said, "I don't know who that is." They cuffed him, read him his rights, loaded him into the back of a patrol car, and then the forensic team went to work. Ortiz walked through Tish's house slowly, methodically, taking in every detail. The place was neat, almost obsessively so. No clutter, no personal photos, no decorations. It felt sterile, like a hotel room someone had been living in for years but never made their own. The living room had a couch, a TV, a coffee table. Nothing unusual. The kitchen was clean, dishes put away, trash emptied. The bedroom was sparse. A bed, a dresser, a closet with a few shirts and jeans hanging in a row. But in the corner of the bedroom, there was a desk, and on that desk there was a laptop. Ortiz bagged it. In the closet, behind a stack of old blankets, they found 3 external hard drives. Ortiz bagged those too, and then, in the back of the closet, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they found a lockbox. Ortiz's hands were steady as she pried it open. Inside, there was a teal-green Nokia phone. Julia's phone. Ortiz stood there, staring at that phone, and for the first time in months, she felt the weight of what she was holding. This wasn't just evidence. This was proof. Proof that Julia had been here. Proof that Tish had taken her. Proof that Rachel Whelan had been right all along. Her daughter hadn't run away. She hadn't gotten lost. She'd been stolen. But the lockbox held more than just the phone. There were receipts. Gas station receipts from October 1994, all from towns along I-75 heading north. There were handwritten notes, dates, times, locations, a log, a record, and there was a small, folded piece of fabric. Ortiz unfolded it carefully. It was a flannel shirt, faded, worn. The same oversized flannel Julia had been wearing the day she disappeared. Ortiz's jaw tightened. She turned to the forensic photographer. "Document everything." But the house wasn't the end of it. Tish's ex-wife had mentioned a storage unit. Ortiz had already obtained a warrant for it. At 9 a.m., the team arrived at a storage facility on the outskirts of Saginaw, Unit 47. Tish had been renting it since 1996. They cut the lock. Inside, the unit was packed. Boxes, plastic bins, Old furniture. It looked like junk, but Ortiz knew better. They started going through it, piece by piece. In one box, they found more external hard drives, dozens of them, all labeled with dates going back to the late 90s. In another box, they found journals, pages and pages of handwritten entries. Tish had documented everything, his hunts, as he called them, the girls he'd targeted, the ones he'd messaged, the ones he'd met. And in a plastic bin in the back corner, they found a small wooden box. Inside were IDs, driver's licenses, school IDs, all belonging to young girls. Julia's ID was among them, but she wasn't the only one. Ortiz sat in the storage unit, surrounded by evidence, and felt a cold, creeping horror settle over her. Glenn Tish hadn't just taken Julia. He'd been doing this for years. How many girls had he targeted? How many had he lured? How many had disappeared without a trace? The hard drives would take months to analyze. The journals would take even longer. But one thing was clear. Julia Whelan wasn't his first victim, and if he hadn't been caught, she wouldn't have been his last. Back at the station, Tish sat in an interrogation room, silent and still. Ortiz and an FBI agent sat across from him. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, the fingerprint, the phone, the flannel shirt, the journals. Tish said nothing. His attorney advised him to stay silent, and for a long time, he did. But then Ortiz leaned forward and said, "We found the storage unit, Glenn. We found everything. The hard drives, the journals, the IDs. We know what you did. We know you didn't stop with Julia." Tish's jaw twitched. "You kept her phone," Ortiz continued. "You kept her shirt. You kept a piece of her because you wanted to remember, because it made you feel powerful." Tish stared at the table. "Where is she, Glenn? Where's Julia?" For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. And then, in a voice so cold it didn't sound human, he said, "I don't remember her name." Ortiz felt her stomach turn. "I don't remember her name," Tish repeated. "There were a lot of them." The room went silent. "But if you're talking about the girl from Clare County," Tish said slowly, "things got out of hand. I panicked. I took care of it." "Took care of it how?" Ortiz asked. Tish smiled. It was a small, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll never find her." Glenn Tish refused to say where Julia's body was. He refused to give her family closure. He refused to show even a shred of remorse. But the evidence didn't need his confession. The prosecutor charged him with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and a list of other crimes that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Even without a body, the case was solid. The phone, the shirt, the journals, the forensic evidence from the hard drives. It was enough. Detective Ortiz called Rachel on April 13th, 2024. "Mrs. Whelan," she said gently. "We got him." Rachel was 69 years old. Her hair was white. Her hands shook as she held the phone. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure. We have evidence. We have his journals. We have Julia's phone. We have her shirt. He's not walking away from this." Rachel closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. "Did he tell you where she is?" Ortiz hesitated. "No, I'm sorry. He won't say." Rachel's voice cracked. "So I still can't bring her home?" "No," Ortiz said quietly. "But we can make sure he never hurts anyone else. And we can make sure Julia's story is told. We can make sure people remember her." Rachel nodded, even though Ortiz couldn't see her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." On April 15th, 2024, Rachel Whelan held a press conference outside the Clare County Sheriff's Office. She stood at a podium, flanked by Detective Ortiz and Sheriff Kovac, and faced a crowd of reporters, community members, and families of other missing children. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the podium. 30 years ago, she began, my daughter walked out of our house and never came home. For 30 years, I waited. I searched. I prayed. I hoped. And I refused to give up. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. Julia was not just a victim. She was my daughter. She had dreams. She loved to read. She wanted to be a teacher. She had a future. And Glenn Tish stole it from her. Her voice broke, but she kept going. I may never be able to bring Julia home. I may never be able to lay her to rest the way she deserves. but I can stand here today and tell you that the man who took her will never walk free again. He will never hurt another child, and Julia's name will not be forgotten." She looked directly into the camera. "To every family out there living this nightmare, don't give up. Don't ever give up, because justice may take 30 years, but it can still come." The trial began in October 2024. The evidence was overwhelming. The forensic analysis of the hard drives revealed thousands of images and videos, none of Julia, but enough to prove a pattern of predatory behavior spanning decades. The journals detailed his methods, his targets, his obsession. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked at Glenn Tish and said, "You are a predator. You stole lives. You destroyed families. And you showed no remorse. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and you will die there." Tish showed no emotion. Rachel sat in the courtroom, surrounded by friends and advocates, and finally allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't the ending she wanted. She still didn't have Julia's body. She still didn't have closure. But she had justice. In the months that followed, Rachel worked with Detective Ortiz to establish the Julia Whelan Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to educating teenagers and parents about online predators, grooming tactics, and digital safety. She planted a tree at the Clare County boardwalk in Julia's memory. Hundreds of people attended the ceremony, and on October 18, 2024, exactly 30 years after Julia disappeared, Rachel stood at the boardwalk, surrounded by candles and flowers, and spoke her daughter's name out loud. "Julia Marie Whelan, you were loved, you are remembered, and you will never be forgotten." Glenn Tish is currently serving life without parole at a maximum security prison in Michigan. He has never revealed where Julia's body is, but the investigation into his journals and hard drives is ongoing. Authorities believe he may be connected to other unsolved disappearances across the Midwest. Rachel Whelan is 70 years old now. She still lives in Michigan. She still advocates for missing children, and she still keeps a photo of Julia on her desk, 16 years old, smiling softly, frozen in time. Julia never came home. But 30 years later, her family finally got the truth, and a monster finally faced justice. So here's my question for you. How many other families are still waiting? How many other cold cases are sitting in evidence rooms, waiting for someone to ask the right question? If this story moved you, if Julia's story mattered to you, do me a favor. Share this video, leave a comment. Let people know that these cases don't just disappear, that these victims deserve to be remembered. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because this channel is dedicated to telling the stories others forget, to shining a light on the cases that deserve justice.